From the headquarters of Telesur English, Quito, Ecuador. I'm Carla Gonzalez, and this is From the South. We begin in Barbados, where the 31st Inter-sessional meeting of the Conference of Heads of Government of the Caribbean Community will soon begin. Canada's Foreign Minister François-Philippe Champagne arrived on Monday, meeting with Prime Minister Motley of Barbados and CARICOM Secretary General Ilwin Larocque. Prime Minister Motley was advised shortly before that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau would be unable to attend due to domestic matters. And Trudeau's trip was cancelled amid nationwide blockades on Canada's railway system held by Indigenous people and allies against a planned pipeline project in the west of the country. Trudeau was expected to fly to Barbados on Monday to speak at the two-day meeting of CARICOM heads of government, where he intended to advocate for a seat at the UN Security Council. Also in Canada, in the largest city, families celebrated the statutory holiday Family Day with solidarity actions calling for the RCMP, the police, to leave Wet'suwet'en territory. Hundreds of marchers took their demands for respect for the indigenous territories to the Queen's Park Provincial Parliament. Similar demonstrations and round dances were held around the country as direct action to block key railway continues. In other news, Venezuela's President Nicolás Maduro has warned about possible hostilities along the Venezuelan border with Colombia.
Along our northwest border with Colombia, there are groups carrying out trainings on the side of Macao. These are groups of deserters, mercenaries and traitors training to attack Venezuelan military units in the Zulia state. I warn, you know this well, we do not want war. We do not want terrorism, we don't want violence, but we are not afraid to fight with weapons to protect the peace, the territorial integrity and the future of Venezuela. The world needs to know this.
President Maduro says there are groups training near the border which were sent by the U.S. government.
Cuando Donald Trump
2 weeks ago, Donald Trump said he was going to crush Venezuela, and now he tells Lenin Moreno that he is in charge of Venezuela. It is because he is thinking about terrorism, violence, invasions, and war. That is what Donald Trump is thinking about. Donald Trump was convinced that it is easy, that coming into Venezuela is a piece of cake, and that they have the backing of mercenaries who are already prepared in Colombia to invade Venezuela, and that we will all surrender. We are all going to give up. That's what makes Donald Trump special. That's why Trump says, I'm going to crush Venezuela. I'm going to crush and break Venezuela. And tells Lenin Moreno, don't mess with Venezuela since I will take care of Venezuela. As if he was an emperor and we were a colony. No, we do not want war. We do not want violence. We do not want terrorism. But we are not afraid of military combat.
Venezuela has suspended Portuguese airline TAP for 3 months over allowing a relative of opposition member Juan Guaidó to travel with explosives. Juan Marquez, Guaidó's uncle, was arrested upon returning to Venezuela alongside with Guaidó last week for allegedly having explosives hidden in various objects in his luggage. The Venezuelan government also accuses TAP of hiding Guaidó's name from the official passenger list and using a false identity for him. Transport Minister Hipólito Abreu said the serious irregularities at TAP could lead to a permanent ban.
We will be evaluating 3 possible levels of action according to what happened. Number 1, a series of fines that correspond to these cases, as well as the possible sanctions or suspensions of the TAP airline. Depending on the facts that have occurred and how the investigations develop, we could arrive at the revocation of the aeronautical service of this company and permanent suspension.
Aruba's Justice Minister Andine Bicker has denied reports that aviation authorities in that country have intercepted and confiscated a Venezuelan plane carrying 900 kilograms of gold. Bicker said the story carried by media outlets was false. The head of the Caribbean nation's aviation authority also denied the reports. And Dominican voters will head to the polls again on March 15 for a special makeup municipal elections after the vote was cancelled on the weekend due to technical problems. The Central Electoral Board announced that the elections will use paper ballots in all polling stations in the country. All citizens eligible to vote can participate in this election. The decision follows the suspension of the electoral process this Sunday due to alleged technical problems with the automated voting system that was to be used in a small percentage of the precincts.
Of the 15th of March 2020, an extraordinary municipal elections will be held in the Dominican Republic, and all the voting to elect new mayors will be carried out by using physical ballots at a national.
The president of the Dominican Republic, Danilo Medina, said his government will guarantee the necessary resources for the new polls after the Central Electoral Board announced the date for this new municipal elections.
The government is firmly committed to protecting democratic institutions and ensuring respect for our constitutional order, and we will do so by supporting due processes, strengthening legal ties, and ensuring the necessary resources to help the electoral processes. The Constitution of the Republic establishes that, firstly, municipal and presidential elections must be held independently, and secondly, that the elected municipal authorities must take office on April the 24th of this year.
President Medina also urged political parties to refrain themselves from causing a ruckus over the municipal elections.
Quisiera también en esta ocasión hacer un llamado.
I would also like to call on all politicians and opinion leaders of the country. This is a call for sanity and responsibility. It is in situations like this when we must show regardless of our leadership by acting with prudence and putting the interests of the country over the interests of the party supporters at all times. As I said earlier, this situation has to be resolved according to the Constitution and the law, so I urge all public and private institutions to continue with their normal operations.
The candidate for president under Bolivia's movement towards socialism, Luis Arce, has traveled to Argentina to meet with former President Evo Morales. National and departmental leaders of the MAS also traveled for the meeting in Buenos Aires, which will lay out plans for the electoral campaign, as a number of movement leaders remain in exile. A new poll released by private company Unitel shows Arce in the lead nationally and in 5 of 9 departments. Coming up, Togo is preparing for elections. More details when we come back. Welcome back. Now we take you to a series of reports which we're starting today, 1 year after the attempt by the Venezuelan opposition to enter supposed humanitarian aid, to understand the context and the attempts by them to overthrow a government.
The date was January 5th, 2019. The legislative year has just begun in Venezuela, and expectations were high among lawmakers.
In peace, in a healthy peace, all in peace.
But peace wasn't necessarily what they wanted for Venezuela.
We urge Nicolás Maduro to not take office as president and respect the Assembly's role and transfer provisional power to this body until new elections take place.
The Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela is perplexed by these extravagant declarations by a group of countries of the American continent. After receiving orders from the U.S. government through a video conference, they have decided to support a coup in Venezuela.
And that was the first part of Washington's aggression. Juan Guaidó was chosen by the White House to be the poster child of their plan once he became the president of the National Assembly.
After the legislative session, we formally speak to the media.
We have to call Juan Guaidó a U.S. marketing phenomenon. He was created. They considered all his aspects, like his youth or the color of his skin.
The marketing phenomenon started with the script of his speech when taking his oath as president of the National Assembly. That speech set the agenda, the narrative, and the actions that followed.
We reaffirm the illegitimacy of Nicolás Maduro Moros for not carrying out an election on May 20.
These facts lead us back to 2018. This sector of the opposition, now led by Juan Guaidó, does not recognize Nicolás Maduro and speaks of stealing the presidency. Ironically, they demanded, through violent actions known as guarimbas, to move forward with the elections in 2017.
We want an open review of the election schedule in Venezuela and to move forward with the presidential elections.
But this radical sector of the opposition did not participate in the presidential election and called for a boycott.
We won't participate in this electoral fraud, and we will leave them alone with this election. We will leave the street desolated.
But another group from the opposition, cast aside by their own people, did participate in the presidential elections by signing an agreement to set up a dialogue, while 4 political parties from the opposition rejected it.
But the essential is there, an agreement on the electoral dates, electoral guarantees, and the electoral observation missions.
Part of the opposition is now participating in a dialogue, distancing themselves from violent strategies and calls for a military invasion. They say their main mistakes were calling for an abstention, refusing to accept that presidential elections did take place, and declaring that there is no legitimate president.
For me, it was never explained what really happened on May 20, 2018. They took it on Maduro, and that's the biggest contradictions. The worst part is that the international community supported it.
On January 10, 2019, with the recognition of more than 90 countries, Nicolás Maduro took office as president for a second term.
I will fulfill all the mandate of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela.
The sun in Venezuela rises from the Essequibo, always loyal, never becoming traitors.
At the same time, the attacks of the United States turned towards the military in an attempt to break up their unity and loyalty.
Soldier of our homeland Venezuela, I'm giving you an order.
The media, the accomplices, showed this as a sign of power.
The U.S. government was fooled. It was manipulated by the offers of those who want to take power by force. By going against the Constitution, they claimed the military was on their side, which was a lie.
The opposition created an amnesty law to try convincing the military to support the coup, but they weren't successful. On our next report, we will recall the story of the false humanitarian aid at the Colombian border.
Madeline Garcia, Telesur, Caracas, Venezuela.
The Congress in Paraguay has declared a national health emergency over the dengue fever outbreak. The declaration will grant extraordinary powers to the government to quickly release emergency funds to combat the epidemic. The health emergency will last 90 days. Paraguay has so far recorded 6 deaths and over 4,250 cases confirmed of dengue cases across the country.
According to experts, dengue eradication can take up to 100 years. But even if they exaggerate, we are going to assume that it will take at least 20 years. We are talking about 20 years. The country has to be ready for the next 20 years. It can be that people die for dengue every year. Right now, we are experiencing another very serious epidemic.
United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has called for de-escalation and diplomacy in the resolution of tensions between India and Pakistan over Kashmir and Jammu after he arrived in Pakistan for a 4-day visit.
Clear that we have taken a position about the need for Security Council resolutions to be implemented and for effective de-escalation and dialogue linked to that, with another very important condition, which is full respect for human rights and continental freedoms in Jammu and Kashmir. In relation to the ceasefire, I visited Unmojib. We believe that Unmojib should have full freedom of movement. It has on the Pakistani side. We hope that this will also be achieved on the other side. And we will be strengthening its equipment capacity in order to better be able to implement its mandate.
Togo's incumbent president, Faure Gnassingbe, who is seeking another term in office, has put the fight against terrorism on the top of his campaign agenda. During a Sunday rally, President Gnassingbe has stressed the importance of preserving peace and security, but also to keep up the fight against religious extremism and terrorism. Togo will hold presidential elections on February 22nd. After this last break, Tunisia could have early elections and a dissolved parliament. Stay with us for more.
A review of the world news that investigates, incites analysis and induces criticism, because every event has a context.
Pusimos el punto en la I.
Dot in the eye. Saturdays, only on Telesur.
Thank you for joining us. Let's continue with news. The Tuareg community in Niger's northern Agadez region is holding the annual Air Festival. This festival is considered one of the most important gatherings to celebrate the culture of the Tuareg people, and it has been held since 2001. The festival includes songs and cultural dances, poetry readings, camel rides, and games. It attracts artists from other Nigerian regions and African countries, as well as from other parts of the world. More than 2 million Tuaregs live in the Sahara Desert area, stretching across Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso, Algeria, and Tunisia.
Chiraye is the junction of the Tenere Dunes and the Air Mountains. You can see what the landscape looks like, a unique landscape, a landscape that is the pride of our country.
And in sports, 2019 World Cup rugby champions South Africa on Monday won the Team of the Year award at the prestigious Laureus World Sports Awards ceremony held in Berlin, Germany. The Springboks emerged top in the vote, which included UEFA Champions League winners Liverpool, Spain's men's basketball team, Women's World Cup winners the United States, and NBA champions Toronto Raptors. They won the Rugby World Cup for a third time when they defeated England in the final in Yokohama, Japan in November 2019. The victory saw team captain Siya Kolisi become the first black captain to lift the Webb Ellis Trophy.
And yeah, we've really enjoyed every single part of it. And one thing that I'll never forget what Coach Rachi said, it's really a privilege to play rugby in South Africa because you get to impact people's lives who don't play rugby, and it can bring a country together like we've seen in the past couple of weeks.
Congratulations to South Africa. In other news, the Tunisian President Kais Saied has hinted on calling for snap elections if the parliament doesn't approve his government. A few days after key Islamist-inspired Ennahda party pulled out of the government line proposed by designated Prime Minister Elias Fakfak. President Saied said the only remaining option would be to dissolve parliament and call for an early election. The country went to the polls last year. However, a fragmented parliament has so far stalled efforts to form a new government.
At that time, it is possible, as the Constitution stipulates, to resort to the people since they are sovereign. They grant and withdraw confidence to whomever they wish, and the final word is reserved for the law and for the Tunisians.
Syrian government forces have made significant advances in their military offensive against the last major rebel stronghold, taking over at least 23 villages west of Aleppo over the weekend. According to state television, the Russian-backed forces have liberated all the villages and small towns west of Aleppo city. The latest advances come after government forces drove rebel fighters from the key M5 highway linking Aleppo to the capital Damascus, and thus reopening the fastest route between Syria's two biggest cities for the first time in years. And on Monday, President Bashar al-Assad congratulated the Syrian Arab Army. He said the victory is a symbol of the Syrian people's will to defend and protect their homeland.
Thus, the battle to liberate the countryside of Aleppo and Idlib continues, regardless of some empty voices coming from the north, as does the battle to liberate all Syrian soil, to crush terrorism and to achieve stability. We all triumphed over the fear that they tried to sow in our hearts. We triumphed over the delusions that they tried to instill in our minds. We triumphed over disintegration, over hatred, over betrayal, and over everyone who represents, carries, and practices these attributes.
And as recent efforts to reach a ceasefire in Libya have failed, a new round of talks is expected to take place soon. But the United Nations fears the recent increase in violence in Libya threatens the possibility of achieving a lasting peace.
There are serious ruptures to this truce. There are serious violations, including additional mobilization, and in fact, as of the last week or 10 days, new strikes in and around Tripoli, and that is, of course, having a direct impact on civilians again.
Now let's go back to Canada and an update on what Justin Trudeau is facing. He's now facing growing pressure as Indigenous peoples stand against the construction of the Coastal GasLink pipeline that would run through Wet'suwet'en territory. Land defenders and other demonstrators shut down one of Canada's busiest rail corridors over the weekend. On Saturday, Indigenous Services Minister Mark Miller met with the Tien-Dinaga Mohawk First Nation and described the situation as highly volatile. More than 24 people were arrested in early February following similar protests. And we were joined by Montreal-based journalist and editor of Ricochet Media, Ethan Cox, who detailed the persecution of Indigenous peoples at the hands of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police.
The government's big fear in these type of situations is that the First Nations will generate public sympathy. And I think that's certainly what we've seen happening over the last week, with literally hundreds of solidarity demonstrations, actions, blockades of rail lines, this type of thing in response to a raid on all of these sites, on First Nations people. You know, basically what happened is tactical units with the federal police force went in, arrested and removed First Nations people from their own territory. And that has generated a groundswell of opposition in Canada.
And with that, we end our news brief. But you can find all of our stories by checking our website, telesurenglish.net. And be sure to also join us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English,